Viewer discretion is advised. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only. In a moment that left the courtroom stunned, a powerful truth was laid bare. Federal prosecutors presented private messages from one of the most influential figures in the music industry, Sean Diddy Combs. These weren't just leaked texts or gossip-fueled speculation. These were official, court-admitted messages. Verified. Undeniable. Up until that point, Diddy sat composed. Stoic. Almost untouchable. But as the printed pages were handed to the judge, then displayed to the courtroom, something changed. His expression froze. His color faded. And for the first time during the entire trial, the illusion of control began to slip. The room fell silent. The judge called for a pause. And a collective gasp rippled through those in attendance, including seasoned legal experts who had seen it all, or so they thought. These messages, spanning nearly a decade, weren't just embarrassing or controversial. They were deeply disturbing. They revealed what prosecutors described as a chilling pattern: manipulation, coercion, and abuse of power. Not just aimed at rivals or critics, but at young, up-and-coming artists, music executives, and even journalists. This wasn't just one man behaving badly. This was the architecture of control. In one early exchange, Diddy allegedly wrote, "Need to handle the J situation before it gets out. She's talking too much. Remind her what happens to people who forget where their success came from." Another message reportedly showed how he used his influence to pull funding and radio play from an artist who defied him. "Make sure it looks natural." And it didn't stop there. The texts described a world behind the velvet ropes where party invitations came with strings, phones were confiscated, and leverage was the ultimate currency. So-called leverage parties were mentioned, where individuals were allegedly recorded without their knowledge, placed in compromising situations, and later blackmailed into silence or obedience. One message from an associate read chillingly, "Got the footage from last night. Quality is perfect." She has no idea she was being recorded. As the courtroom absorbed each line, each revelation, a clearer picture formed. This was about more than ego or excess. This was a system, a machine, designed to protect power and punish resistance. The prosecution made it plain. These are not just business messages. They are a roadmap. A confession. Written one text at a time. As Diddy sat motionless, the message to the world was unmistakable. No matter how powerful you are, the truth has a way of rising. And for the first time, that truth was being read aloud, one message at a time. One text. Just one message can change everything. And in this case, it did. In the courtroom, under federal investigation, prosecutors unveiled a damning string of private communications pulled directly from Sean Diddy Combs' personal devices. These messages weren't vague. They weren't open to interpretation. They were direct, calculated, and chilling. One of the earliest messages read, "Need to handle the J situation before it gets out. She's talking too much. Remind her what happens to people who forget where their success came from." It was a veiled threat, but not so veiled that anyone could miss the meaning. It wasn't just about controlling a narrative. It was about instilling fear. This message, just one of many, set the tone for what prosecutors described as a long-running operation of control. And as more texts were read aloud, a disturbing pattern emerged. They alleged that Diddy used his influence to punish those who crossed him, especially young artists who dared to speak out or step away. One message appeared to instruct his team to pull financial backing and disrupt exposure opportunities. Make sure it looks natural. That wasn't just about canceling a tour date. That was about crushing a career, quietly, strategically, so it couldn't be traced back. And the silencing didn't end there. The messages outlined a system that extended far beyond the boardroom or the recording studio. According to prosecutors, Diddy's inner circle was tasked with monitoring people, tracking movements, recording conversations, even screening who got into exclusive events. In one directive sent to his security team, Diddy allegedly wrote, "Make sure everyone's phones are taken at the door. Anyone who doesn't comply doesn't get in." Why? Why would that be necessary? Prosecutors suggested the reason was simple. control the environment, eliminate evidence, and intimidate anyone who might think about exposing what really went on behind the scenes. It paints a picture of a man not just running an empire, but guarding it with paranoia and power. And it raises deeper questions about how much of the industry operated under this same veil of secrecy. Artists, many of them young, ambitious, and vulnerable, were given opportunities, but at what cost? The implication was clear: step out of line, and there would be consequences. Not always loud, not always public, but devastating, nonetheless. The environment described in these messages wasn't just toxic, it was methodical. Security protocols, silence agreements, strategic blacklisting. This wasn't just a reaction to rumors. It was the machinery of control, working to keep people in line, to keep stories buried, and to protect one man's grip on power. And as these messages were laid out in court, each one reinforced that this wasn't just hearsay. It was documentation. It was a blueprint. A paper trail of manipulation. Legal analysts who witnessed the proceedings called it one of the most organized, controlled operations of silence they'd ever seen in an entertainment-related case. It wasn't just shocking, it was deeply calculated. And the impact? Massive. As these revelations hit the public, industry executives scrambled. Artists began distancing themselves. Sponsors and partners went silent. The narrative was no longer controllable. The power that once protected Diddy now seemed to be collapsing under the weight of undeniable evidence. And all of it started with messages like these, small in size, massive in consequence. A single line like, "Remind her what happens," was no longer just a threat. It became a warning to an entire industry. The days of unchecked silence may finally be coming to an end. What happens when power is abused behind closed doors, when influence is weaponized, and silence is bought or forced? In the ongoing federal case against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs, one of the most chilling revelations was the mention of so-called leverage parties. According to prosecutors, these weren't just celebrity gatherings or after-parties. These were strategic operations. Events designed to lure young, aspiring artists into vulnerable situations, often involving alcohol, drugs, and subtle manipulation. But what made these parties so dangerous wasn't just the environment. It was what happened after. Because what guests didn't know was that they were allegedly being recorded without their consent, without their knowledge. And those recordings weren't meant for promotion or nostalgia. They were ammunition. One text read, "Got the footage from last night. Quality is perfect." The reply followed shortly after. "She has no idea she was being recorded." Let that sink in. This wasn't about entertainment. It was about control. Leverage. The kind of leverage that could be used to silence, to blackmail, or to manipulate. Prosecutors allege that these recordings became part of a larger pattern, a system of intimidation used to keep people quiet, compliant, and loyal. Because when someone thought about speaking up, when an artist or insider got too close to exposing the truth, there was a message for that, too. Whatever level makes the problem disappear. Permanently if necessary. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't metaphor. This was a threat raw, direct, and undeniable. And that's why this case has become so much bigger than one man. These aren't just isolated messages. They point to a structured machine of coercion, a network allegedly involving not just bodyguards and executives, but doctors, publicists, and even media figures. Individuals who helped facilitate silence, downplay abuse, or discredit victims before they could ever go public. Some victims were reportedly drugged under the guise of relaxing or unwinding before contract negotiations. Others were smeared with false media narratives, written by journalists who were allegedly paid to spin the story. And if the victim still didn't back down, if legal threats or PR pressure didn't work, prosecutors allege more aggressive tactics came into play: threats against family members, sudden disappearances of opportunities, or even forced hospitalizations. This wasn't just corruption. This was industrial-scale manipulation, a playbook that allegedly allowed powerful figures to operate unchecked for years. And behind all of it was a wall of silence. A culture of fear. Many of the people who attended these parties, who witnessed this behavior firsthand, never spoke up. And who could blame them? Speaking out didn't just risk a career. It could risk your life, your reputation, your future. But now, the silence is cracking. These messages, revealed in court, are giving the public a rare glimpse behind the curtain into a world few ever saw, and fewer dared to expose. A world where loyalty was demanded, where fear was currency, and where evidence was gathered not for justice, but for control. And if these allegations are true, then we're not just dealing with a scandal. We're looking at a reckoning. Because if artists were targeted, if victims were silenced, and if the industry looked the other way, then the damage is far deeper than anyone imagined. The real question now isn't just what Diddy knew or did. It's how many people enabled it, and how long the system will protect them. The courtroom proceedings continue, and more messages are expected to be revealed. But already, the impact is clear. This isn't just a trial about one man's behavior. It's a spotlight on the dark corners of an industry long protected by wealth, celebrity, and silence. And for the first time, that silence is being shattered. By 2023, the walls were closing in. 4 years, Sean Diddy Combs had operated at the highest levels of fame and power. A mogul. A gatekeeper. A kingmaker in the world of music, fashion, and entertainment. But behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. Quiet investigations had grown louder. Whispers had become subpoenas. Federal agents were no longer watching from the shadows, they were closing in fast. And then, panic took over. Prosecutors say the digital trail tells the story best. A flurry of messages from Diddy's inner circle revealed a man spiraling, no longer in control. Orders were sent, quick, frantic, urgent. Destroy everything. Hard drives. Phones. Servers. Wipe it all. It was no longer about managing a brand, it was about survival. And not just legal survival, but reputational, financial, existential. And in one message that stunned prosecutors, Diddy reportedly warned, "If I go down, I'm not going alone." It wasn't just a statement. It was a threat. A promise. A signal to anyone who had worked with him, protected him, or stayed silent over the years. The fallout wouldn't be his alone to bear. "Activate the contingency plan," he wrote. "Release everything we have on everyone." Those words shook the investigation. Because it implied one chilling fact: Diddy wasn't just collecting influence. He was collecting insurance. Leverage. Files. Secrets. Evidence. Prosecutors now believe he had quietly amassed a trove of compromising information, photos, recordings, documents on some of the most powerful names in music, media, and beyond. A digital vault of dirt, ready to be unleashed if the empire began to fall. It was the ultimate defense. If I burn, you burn with me. But even that wasn't the end. In what are believed to be his final communications before arrest, Diddy allegedly issued one last command, this time, not to destroy evidence or leak files, but to prepare an escape. "Make the calls. Secure the jet. We might need to leave." Sources say he had multiple properties overseas. Safe houses. Offshore accounts. If the pressure became unbearable, the plan was simple: vanish before the cuffs could close. One of the final messages read, "I built this world. Without me, they would be nothing." To his supporters, it might sound like the defiant cry of a self-made icon. But in the courtroom, to investigators and victims, it echoed as something far darker, a glimpse into the mind of a man who believed himself untouchable, irreplaceable, even as the walls came crashing down. What made this moment so significant wasn't just the content of the messages, it was the tone. The desperation. The unraveling of someone who had spent decades crafting the image of control, confidence, and calculated dominance. Because here, laid bare through digital forensics and court testimony, was a man at the edge of collapse. And as the investigation deepens, prosecutors say the final chapter hasn't been written yet. More messages are being recovered. More witnesses are stepping forward. And those named in Diddy's contingency plan are now facing scrutiny of their own. This was never just about one man. It's about an industry. A culture. A system of power built on silence, secrets, and intimidation. And now that system is being exposed line by line, message by message. The empire may be falling. But what rises from the ashes will depend on one thing. Whether the truth continues to come out, or whether the contingency plan wins. In the final moments of the trial, the courtroom was silent. The air was heavy. Eyes were fixed on the prosecution, as the lead attorney stood and delivered a closing argument that cut through any remaining doubt. He didn't soften the blow. These aren't just business messages, he declared. They're evidence, each one a piece of a calculated, abusive system. A system designed to manipulate, to intimidate, to silence. And at the center of it all, Sean Diddy Combs. As the prosecution laid out the timeline, text by text, incident by incident, Diddy sat motionless. No outbursts. No objections. Just the quiet unraveling of a carefully built legacy. Years of alleged coercion, blackmail, surveillance, and psychological control all laid bare before a jury. Before the world. But this wasn't just about one man's downfall. Because outside that courtroom, shockwaves were spreading fast. The music industry, a multi-billion-dollar empire built on fame, influence, and access, reacted with urgency. Emergency meetings were called at record labels. Public statements were rushed out by PR teams. And artists, some of them protégés, collaborators, or former allies, scrambled to cut ties. The silence that had protected powerful men for decades. It cracked wide open. But here's what makes this trial different. It's not just a scandal. It's a mirror. Because what prosecutors exposed wasn't just the actions of a celebrity. It was a culture. An ecosystem where abuse was ignored, where money muted morality, and where silence became currency. This case is revealing the dark underbelly of an industry that has long claimed to be progressive, inclusive, and forward-thinking. But behind the headlines and the awards shows, the machinery was often built to protect those at the top, no matter the cost to those at the bottom. Young artists were told to be grateful. Victims were told to stay quiet. And executives, they looked the other way. Some, prosecutors allege, even participated. For years, it worked. But not anymore. The trial pulled back the curtain. And what the world saw wasn't just one man's misdeeds, it was an entire system of complicity. A system that enabled Diddy. That enabled others. That ignored cries for help, erased complaints, and traded silence for access. And now, the music industry is scrambling not just to manage the fallout, but to survive it. Because accountability has arrived. And it's not leaving. In the weeks following the closing arguments, insiders say the ripple effect has only grown. Whistleblowers are coming forward. Contracts are being reviewed. NDAs are being challenged. For the first time, there's real fear inside the boardrooms, not of artists, not of fans, but of truth. Because when the truth becomes louder than the silence, everything changes. This case, no matter the final verdict, has already forced a reckoning. It's shown that fame doesn't equal immunity, that wealth can't erase a digital trail, and that the stories people tried to bury will always find their way back to the surface. So yes, this trial has Diddy's name on it. But in reality, it's about so much more. It's about the young woman who was silenced in exchange for her dream. It's about the producer who walked away, blackballed for knowing too much. It's about every artist, executive, intern, or fan who asked questions and got punished for it. And most of all, it's about the culture that enabled it all. Now, the veil is lifting. The industry is no longer protected by celebrity or silence. The stories are out. The evidence is real. And accountability is knocking at the door. The only question left is, who's next to answer it?